Welcome to Slimehouse, a podcast rated PG for crude humor, outrageous hijinks, and mild language. I'm Jenna.
I'm Jasper.
I'm Max.
I'm Nelson.
And I'm Jared. And today we are joined by a very special guest, my sister, Jenna Anderson. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here, guys.
Woo. And Jenna, the reason we have you here today is that we're covering a movie that we know, or I know, is very special to you.
I was going to say a film that I watched in its entirety for the first time yesterday.
Still can't.
The movie we are covering today in Slimehouse is Hop.
The Easter Bunny works one day a year, travels the world, and is beloved by everyone. Who wouldn't want a job like that?
You're about to be crowned the Easter Bunny.
Look, Dad, I want to drum in a band. I want to see the world.
Evie, the Easter Bunny sees every country in one night.
Oh, really, Dad? What about China?
Oh, it's candy, woman! All right, so we haven't cracked China yet.
Don't want to be the Easter Bunny.
So the movie Hop centers around the heir or heir to the Easter Bunny's throne, who runs away to Los Angeles to chase his dreams of being a rock and roll drummer. But on the way, he befriends a lovable slacker, and together they help set the course for Easter's to come.
All right, so this one was directed by Tim Hill, who we actually saw very recently, a director of Max Keeble's Big Move, a true slime king. Also worked on Muppets from Space, directed Garfield 2, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and very recently War with Grandpa. This was a Illumination release. It's their only live-action film. The score is by Christopher Lennertz, who, this guy has pretty much only slime in his score filmography. He did Alvin and the Chipmunks, Marmaduke, Cats and Dogs, Revenge of Kitty Galore, Dr. Dolittle 3, and even the new Tom and Jerry, so he's still working.
Would you say that he has a very high slime score himself?
Oh, he does, yeah. His scores are slime scores. It was shot by Peter Lyons Collister, who another person who's worked pretty much only in slime. We've talked a lot about these cinematographers who do a lot of slime, but his filmography is pretty much just it. He did Problem Child, Dunstan Checks In, Dr. Dolittle, Master of Disguise. Characters were designed by Peter DeSave, who designed the Ice Age characters. And a very interesting character involved with this movie is this guy, Ali D. Theodore, who, this is straight from his Wikipedia. He had a song in American Pie 2, and then cold called every music supervisor, production company, and Hollywood studio in the city, telling them he was a guy for any genre. And so, anytime you hear kind of a generic, kind of Pitbull-ish kind of song that's not Pitbull in a Slimehouse movie, it's probably this guy. He's did the thing he did for this movie is he did the original rap for the Pink Berets character, but he's also provided original songs for Speed Racer, Night at the Museum, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Old Dogs, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the Cats and Dogs movies, Turbo, Marmaduke, G-Force, Garfield, even some older ones like Cody Banks and Big Fat Liar. So, Ali D. Theodore, thank you for being the sound of slime.
We gotta get him on the show. That's
Who knew?
Yeah,
Who knew?
It's almost as if they were gathering together and they like get us like all the slime ultimate draft picks for this movie. And with the cast, we've got something a little different. It's headlined in the live action component by James Marsden, who is slowly working his way up as kind of a neo-slime legend, notably Sonic the Hedgehog, but also has some slimy-esque roles in Enchanted, Cats and Dogs 2, as well as the upcoming Boss Baby sequel. Then E.B., the hero of the story, is played by Russell Brand, who we did see once before in Four Kids and It, but is more known as like a British rocker than necessarily like a Slimehouse star. And then in supporting roles, you've got Hank Azaria, Hugh Laurie, Elizabeth Perkins, and Gary Cole, all kind of rounding out the supporting cast. But we did fail to mention one of the crew members of this movie.
How dare you? Yes. While I hesitate to claim any role of involvement with this film, part of the reason that Jared asked me to guest star on today's episode is that right after college, I worked for Illumination Entertainment for a year. I actually interned for them my final year at USC. And when I was an intern, that was the year that Hop came out. So I definitely got coffee for a few people that worked on the movie. I myself don't have any, crazy fun background stories or anything like that. So just saying that out the gate. But yeah, I have ties to Illumination. And even though you guys can't see that are listening to the podcast, I'm repping my Lorax crew shirt today from the Illumination product of the following year, 2012.
Love it. I'm curious, Jared, had you seen this movie since your sister had such a prominent creative role in this?
I'm going to tell it straight. I asked Jenna if I should see this movie, and her response was, "You can if you want."
This was back in 2011 that you're talking about?
Yeah.
I don't remember that moment, but it feels true. It really does.
Yeah. But like my question, because like Max just listed off a lot of people. Do any of those names ring a bell?
You mean like
the crew members? Like, do you know Allie D. Theodore?
Yeah, did you bring coffee to Allie D. Theodore?
Not knowingly. I don't know if I would have been aware of Allie D's legacy at that time.
Very memorable looking figure. So.
Right. No, I would say that if we're talking about the credit sequence at the end of the movie, it was fun to watch. A couple of the executive assistants that are listed towards the end, they are people that I still know and still follow on Instagram and stuff. So there were some names that I do know personally, but people that were scheduling meetings for the movie, not necessarily making the huge decisions for the movie.
This is our first holiday movie in the very small Easter movie realm. And when you were making this, was there a lot of candy on set and a lot of like hollow rabbits and other stuff like that floating around during those long hours of making Hop?
Well, I was never on set, so I worked at the production studio, so the office.
Even that's what I meant. But yeah.
And we did have a lot of marketing promotional materials. That's what I remember. I vaguely recall, although sometimes my memories of Lorax and Hop blend together, that we had, a campaign with McDonald's, for example. So the marketing folks that worked at the office had cups for supersized portions of meals that had, EB on them. And I remember some kind of cardboard cutout that probably had the jelly bean poop, which I can't wait to talk about in the context of slime.
I had never seen this before the episode, but it felt like in 2011, I was finally just like not part of like the demographic for kids movie or children's movie marketing. And so this is one of those first movies to me that kind of just came out of nowhere and was like a big hit at the box office that I really had no real context. So to me, that was kind of a big moment of like, oh, wow, like Slimehouse isn't for me anymore. And it hasn't been for a while, but being in high school, growing up in suburbia, you're still inundated with the marketing for all of these kind of movies. But in college, finally, it was just like, I have no idea what this movie is until a week before it came out. So to me, it's kind of like a personally kind of interesting milestone in kind of the Slimehouse canon, growing up.
Yeah, I have a younger brother who was like the exact age for Hop when it came out, so I didn't see the movie, but I do remember when he'd have the TV and stuff on, just being inundated with tons of Hop. A pretty major advertising blitz for this movie. I remember there were a lot of like corporate tie-ins, like Jenna had already mentioned. McDonald's, I think, had some Hop stuff. I feel like I'm pretty into like theme parks. Universal Studios definitely had a huge Hop presence at their parks, still do to this day, oddly enough. So yeah, this movie had a lot of marketing behind it, and so I definitely was very aware of this movie, but I didn't see it. I was already a little too old at this time to be interested.
I didn't see it either. I do remember on Box Office Mojo, because I'm a movie stats fan, like all of us, that it just barely creeped its way to 100 and being like, oh, wow, look, Hop did it after all.
Yeah.
It was a successful movie, but not one I even really remember seeing trailers for, which I think just speaks to like, yeah, I didn't have the TV on kids' channels when it came out. And it is one of our first 2010s releases besides the Goosebumps movies that we've covered. So it's interesting to cover Slimehouse movies of this decade where we're not the right age for it, but they were still coming out in small ways.
And we talk about the era, like 2011, like that year in the Slimehouse timeline as being sort of like a bridge between what we call the swamp era. It was past the peak of Slimehouse, and we kind of like pinpoint that as like kind of like 2003, 2004-ish. And then somewhere in the 2010s, and we haven't really defined this yet, and this is kind of an ongoing process, Neo Slime started up. Questions I have about that are like, did that come with the advent of like movies on Netflix or like, you know, original content on the streaming services? Because I think it kind of did. And so in 2011, those kind of platforms were not like operational yet. So it was mostly theatrical films. They kind of represent when kind of like the twilight of the swamp era, and almost like a, you know, like right before the explosion of Neo Slime. And because Neo Slime is not exactly just like theaters. I think it's also like, you know, it's not just the house of Slimehouse, it's also stuff you can have on the web.
Yeah, one thing that I think is really interesting about this era is that kids are not necessarily going to the theaters as much to get kids entertainment. They're going to the movie theaters for more franchise entertainment, big blockbusters, big tentpole stuff. And so you're seeing less movies where it's just for the kids, by the kids. And I think a lot of that is getting transferred over to television, or in this point, to your point, Jared, YouTube and other avenues of consumption. That's kind of one aspect of this era. The second, I think, is this kind of post Alvin and the Chipmunks, which was a massive success era, where we're seeing studios especially say, okay, we can still bank on kids coming to the theaters if we have these cute CGI cartoon characters in our films, you know. And so after Alvin and the Chipmunks, you have kids movies that are just centered around these CGI characters, because CGI has come a long way since then. And Hop, to me, is one of those prime examples of, oh, the kids don't necessarily want to see other kids on screen. They just want to see creatures doing goofy things.
It's worth mentioning that this is an early release for Illumination Entertainment, and at this point, Illumination hasn't quite figured out its own standing in the kids' movie universe yet. They just had Despicable Me the year prior, which was the face that launched 1,000 Minions, and then they had to figure out what they were going to do next. And this is not a pure animated movie. It actually has a lot of animation for a live action movie. That all the stuff at Easter Island, to me, seems almost entirely real, unless there is really a chocolate factory out there somewhere. But there's a lot of stuff with just James Marsden and kind of running around Hollywood and all that stuff. So that studio is kind of figuring out their voice. And after this, they really pivoted almost exclusively into animation and stuff that, to me, feels less Slimehouse because of that. But at this point, they're still kind of finding their footing in kids' movies, and the era is reflective of that too, as has been said. So I agree. It's kind of an interesting case where, like, it's made by a few different surrounding factors, and therefore fits really kind of almost like a quintessential, like, 2011 PG movie in a funny way.
For sure.
Yeah, I feel like this movie, for me, it's like something that really separates the Neo Slime, a lot of the Neo Slime, from the more traditional Slimehouse we've talked about, is that those were really a lot of times sold on the stars of the movie. They'd have big movie stars. You'd have like Jim Carrey front and center. You'd have Robin Williams front and center. You'd have Brendan Fraser. This seems very much all about the character of E.B. was front and center in everything, which it seems more like something out of an animated movie that you would see highlighted, like the star is this cartoon rabbit. They're really selling E.B. as the star of Hop, not James Marsden or any of the other human characters.
I think the casting of Russell Brand is also something to consider. Definitely not a slime actor by any means, but I think one thing that I think of in terms of like 2010s animated movies is that you'd have these family animated movies where you have these actors from like more kind of adult skewing sources of humor. I also think of like how in The Lion King, Eric Andre is one of the voice actors in that, or John Oliver is. I think that gets to your point, Max, that like it was like people aren't paying attention to that. It's just like you have this like comedic personality that maybe adults, the parents will recognize, but it's not like 10 years prior when Shrek came out, and you have like Eddie Murphy in it, and that's a draw, and then Mike Myers as well. I think what people were looking for in these kind of like animated character driven adventures changed.
Yeah, because I mean, this is like peak Russell Brand's career, and then most of the marketing, they're not really pushing like this is Russell Brand in Hop, which like I feel like you see, like you said with Shrek, and it's very emblematic of this era. Because Alvin and the Chipmunks, for example, no one has any idea unless you look it up who plays any of those characters. Sonic, they didn't push the voice of Sonic, so I feels like these characters have become the stars, not the voice actors or actors anymore.
I do think this movie is an interesting anomaly, though, for this era, in that it is an original movie. It's not based on another previous property, like an Alvin and the Chipmunks, like a Sonic. You know, those are 13 years apart, but within that decade and a half, the majority of, you know, movies that have come out that are geared towards families are based on a previous property. Also, you could argue the majority of movies geared towards any demographic are based on previous properties, but this one does feel like an anomaly in that sense, in that it is a not wholly original, but an original screenplay. And I think in that regard, I have a lot of respect for it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually like this movie a lot more than I was expecting to. It's not like a personal favorite, but I did like it quite a bit.
Yeah, it was easy watching. I felt the same way. I kept on trying to get people to watch it with me because I felt like I needed emotional support to get through it. And I had multiple people like cancel. and so I was, and at the very last minute, you know, I was like, Jared, have you watched it yet? Can we watch it together? And he was already halfway through, but I did watch it on my own, and it went by quickly. It was fun. I enjoyed all of the appearances by actors that, for the most part, you know, I recognize all of them, and they've had some mainstay presence, like having Chelsea Handler as Mrs. Beck. There were a lot of things I wasn't expecting, and I quite enjoyed that. And Jasper, I think it was you that talked about it being an original content, and I think, yeah, it was very different. After this point, Illumination does a lot of Dr. Seuss adaptations, and so they do tend to rely on adapted source material, so this was definitely unusual.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure this is the only Illumination movie that never became or was a part of any kind of franchise.
That's right.
So it's which is surprising because it was a successful movie, but I guess they don't really want to work on live action anymore, I'd guess.
Thinking of it as amalgamation of live action and animation, I think one staple of peak Slimehouse was like 90s and like early 2000s, when like it was kind of coming off Who Framed Roger Rabbit and movies that were kind of like experimenting with like live action and animation and putting it all in the same frame. So this movie is kind of rooted in that. I think of this as like, you know, 2011 is also like when the Marvel Cinematic Universe started happening, and there's movies in that are also kind of technically that. It's a different context because it's still like very much a live action movie, but with CGI characters. This is more directly like it's half an animated movie and half a live action movie.
And if they are doing any borrowing, I would say that they're heavily borrowing from Christmas movies, right? From having the Easter egg sleigh with the chicks as reindeer. That would be the borrowing that I can notice right off the bat, right, from the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, it feels like it's very much like trying to mythologize the Easter Bunny in the same way like Santa Claus is in the popular consciousness.
Yeah, actually, that's perfect you mentioned that, because that was going to be kind of my segue into some of the story components, is that, yes, it's an original movie, but it does feel like they're trying to like basically do, the like Christmas movie equivalent for Easter, where instead of going to the North Pole, we go to Easter Island. Gotcha. And, you know, it's like stuff like that is interesting to like, go to the factory where this happens and kind of learn about, you know, instead of Santa Claus going around the world in one night, it's like, oh, the Easter Bunny has to go around the world except to the places that don't celebrate Easter. And that's like a little joke they have there. And it's like really the only Easter movie I can think of.
There was a classic stop motion Peter Cottontail movie done by the same studio that put together Rudolph and Frosty the Snowman, all those classic Christmas stop motion ones that my sister and I loved when we were kids.
Yeah, I remember watching that one.
I love the Rudolph one.
We still reference it every year because there's some funny lines that we have grown up with. But that was the only, to your point, Nelson, that was the only other Easter movie I knew, growing up until this came out. So maybe in other circles it is a holiday favorite around Easter, but I don't know anyone who watches this religiously.
There's actually a theater around here that every April shows Hop. I don't know how many people show up, but I guess it's a tradition to the movie tavern here. So,
jumping in. Oh,
yeah, go ahead, jump in, hop in.
But on that.
I'm so glad you noticed that. I have that written down too. Hop in, hop out.
On the holiday movie trope train, diving into the factory setting, I think is really important, and how that is laid out. We always see Santa's workshop so jovial and colorful in all these Christmas movies. And this, I don't know exactly what they call it, remind me, but where they make all the Easter candy is just such like a vibrant pop of color. It looks like you're just in an Illumination movie. But to me, it just rung so much as, not necessarily Slimehouse, but just like family fantasy movie.
I don't remember what the factory is called. But
yeah, does it even have a name? I was trying to remember it too, and I can't think of anything.
They called it Marshmallow Chick Machine, so they had a name for the machine that was making the peeps.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we know Slimehouse is kind of built around food, or loves its food, and Easter... It's funny because it's a very secular movie, and Easter is a holiday that, has its religious components, but they really don't even try to bring those in at all whatsoever. And so it's just purely about what the Easter Bunny is. And what is the Easter Bunny really about? It's about the candy. And so in every way possible, the movie has a lot of candy elements, and it works its way into funny little plot bits involving like black licorice, and Peeps get their moment to shine, and other kind of, your favorite Easter candy is all here.
Yeah, I feel like the whole here's where the Easter candy comes from reminded me very much of rang very family movie, sort of family fantasy to me, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff where it's particularly Christmas stuff we were saying, where it's here's where these commonplace toys and stuff where they're actually made, this fantastical location. And I liked that in this, having that whole factory.
On the, topic of food items, we have the Easter jelly bean, and we know now where that comes from. It's EB's, and I assume the Easter Bunny as well. It's their poop. And apparently it's very tasty. Really was quite worried when Kaylee had one of them, and then it was watermelon. So apparently it's still quite delicious.
Yeah, I'm just gonna bridge the gap between some classic Slimehouse gross out humor and some classic Slimehouse food. When you had the poop was also candy, and I remember that being a big thing in the trailer. If there's one thing I remember from the marketing, the big stinger at the end was Kaylee Cuoco eating the gumdrop and saying it was watermelon, which feels like one of the slimiest jokes in this movie, I'd say. Mm-hmm. But yeah, lots and lots of candy in this movie.
One of my favorite lines in the movie is James Marsden says something like, "So you can talk and poop candy, so what?" Which to me is literally, it's almost like a meta calling it sliminess out. Okay, you're a talking animal and you poop candy. How much more slimy can you get?
Yeah, speaking of kind of James Marsden, I can't really refer to him as a trope, but I think very good Slimehouse performance from him in this. I think maybe the slimiest element of the movie might be him altogether. I think he's only been in a few Slimehouse movies now. I think his mugging and sort of his slapstick abilities lend very well to Slimehouse, and I think this performance rang very slimy to me, and especially in a lot of the slapstick scenes.
There's one trope that Marston executes very much here that he does in a lot of his other movies, and it's the human reacting to a talking animal. There's a moment in all of these movies where the talking animal talks, and then the lead actor just has this crazy, I'm going crazy, whoa, a talking animal moment.
My dad's right. I do need to get my act together. In Hollywood, all great artists suffer before they become famous. That lady wrote Harry Potter in a ditch. I have the talent, I have the drive, I have to avoid whatever that was. You know what? We can leave the insurance companies out of this.
They know how to cast him very well, and it's funny that this and Sonic, he pretty much does the exact same thing when he sees the talking animal, and it's like, okay, copy, paste.
Yeah, it's crazy. We have like 2 movies in which James Marsden is joined by like a runaway animal with attitude, CGI animal with attitude. Although Sonic, much more attitude than EB.
Yeah, I was actually like surprised by that in this movie. Like I thought there would be more of like a ego to, because he's like the rock star bunny or whatever in Russell Brand. So I kind of thought it was just gonna be like a kiddie version of a movie Brand did the year before called Get Him to the Greek, where he's just this insufferably egotistical rock dude. So I was expecting that, but with like a cute bunny, and that's like, you know, compared to Sonic, he's like a lot friendlier. I'm not saying he's like not rebellious at all, but I was just like, I was surprised by like that kind of quality to that character in this. I actually thinking like Marsden's character in this is like more conventionally slimy in terms of like what his conflict is. Like he's kind of a man-child and has to grow up and stuff. The slimiest stuff in this movie actually, I think, comes from that. And then also the slimiest scene in the movie is not Marsden reacting to the talking animals, but to the real animals, the dogs, and he has to put on this ridiculous suit. The safety suit was so slimy.
They're playing like Mr. Big Stuff, a classic like disco boomer needle drop in the scene. Just a very good slapstick scene there. My impression of this movie up until watching it the other day was that he would be really doing like Russell Brand hard in this. And when we first meet him, he's like playing the drums along to Good Charlotte, and I was he's got like some guitars in the background, some surfing posters. I was fully expecting him to have a lot more attitude, but his rebellion really only extends to like he doesn't want to be the Easter Bunny. Overall, he's a pretty gentle character. He like makes a few messes, but overall just not really a rebel as much as he's just a rascal, I guess.
Rascally rabbit.
They take his music career kind of seriously in a funny way. Like, oh, he wants to be a drummer, and like that's treated as like a very serious passion, not like a gag. Like, not like he sucks at drumming and that's sort of he should be the Easter Bunny. But it begins right from the get-go, like you said, when he's jamming out the drums. And I just want to point out EB's room in this movie is like the most like quintessential like kids' bedroom, and it's funny because it's animated fully, so they clearly like thought really hard about like how do we make like the ultimate like kids room, and it's messy and it's got the posters and the drum set, and you know, it's just quintessential in that sense.
My favorite music sequence in this movie, and there's a few, you know, there's definitely the middle school dance drops with some, you know, dynamite Me No Speak Americano during the training montage sequence, but my favorite music sequence in this is the I Want Candy performance at the Easter play, where James Marsden's character basically plays it off that EB is a ventriloquist puppet, and they end up stealing the spotlight at James Marsden's adopted sister's Easter play by getting the parents to all sing along in an I Want Candy sing-along, which the song I Want Candy, even though it was a big pop hit in the 80s, feels like it's kind of become just like a kid's anthem. Like when I was growing up, I feel like it was played at like Chuck E. Cheese all the time, because like it's literally a song about
Aaron Carter covered it. I remember.
Yes.
I had that. I
thought.
Okay, I'm just gonna confess right now. I thought it was an Aaron Carter song first.
I thought it was an Aaron Carter song for the longest time. I heard the original later, but I did think it was Bow Wow Wow. Actually, a great band.
Yeah, they're not bad. They're actually quite a good band.
Yeah, kind of grew out of like Adam and the Ants. Cool band. Listeners should check out Bow Wow Wow.
Yeah, that Aaron Carter song kind of Nickelodeonized it. I mean, I remember that music video as if I were watching it right now, and that has like the classic Slimehouse energy to it. So to see it pop up in a 2011 release solidifies it as a throwback to that type of Slimehouse.
Yeah, and that scene to me rings very Slimehouse. Not one because of, you know, the song choice and getting, you know, the kids on stage to sing I Want Candy with him, but also getting the adults on his side to sing I Want Candy, which then later convinces James Marsden's parents' characters to kind of come around and say, okay, maybe he is making something of himself. He's like studying ventriloquism and the crowd loves him. That rings very Slimehouse.
Because of the absurdity of how...
Yeah,
the absurdity of it.
The absurdity of it being played so straight and adults kind of just assuming, oh yeah, this is cool, this is normal. It kind of almost plays into that wish fulfillment stuff we always talk about. Like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if I took over the school play and everyone loved it?
For sure. And this was not the only appearance of I Want Candy in the movie. Interestingly, the song recurs a few times. There's a in-credits version, very much in the vein of Aaron Carter's cover by Cody Simpson, I think was his name, who was kind of not a failure, but a lower profile, like, teen star from the time that they were really trying to make happen. And at one point, EB plays I Want Candy on the drums in a very slimy scene there's a chick who's just kind of a running gag through this movie. There's a lot of chicks in this movie, just because the Easter Bunny, Easter chick, I guess. And they're kind of presented as competitors to the bunnies. And there's this one chick that's always dancing to disco songs, just kind of a classic, just 2011, like, random humor joke. And at one point, he plays... when EB's playing I Want Candy, he starts, like, doing this dance and, like, hitting his butt with batons and stuff. Yeah. And that's a very slimy character, very slimy scene.
Yeah, and his love of music, I think the chick's name is Phil. I mean, that's pretty much what tips the hand over to EB for kind of defeating Carlos, is that this guy just can't not dance to the music.
Yeah. How did that rabbit just talk?
Fred's been studying ventriloquism. Who wants to hear a song? We'd love to sing a song for you.
No, we wouldn't. Fred, stop making a fool of yourself. Sit down.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want candy. I want candy. Take it, kids. I know a girl who's tough but sweet. She's so fine she can't be beat. She's got everything I desire.
He's really good.
I can see his lips move.
Sets the summer sun on fire. I want candy. I could bunk down anywhere. West Wing, Master Suite, I'm not picky. What are the newspapers for?
Yeah, you're an animal, so...
Oh, I understand. I'll just sleep down here, among my poo and pee like a pig.
So I actually think there's two sequences that are very, very funny in this. So the first kind of musical sequence, which isn't necessarily in the Slimehouse vein, EB, the bunny, sneaks into a recording studio and plays drums with the Blind Boys of Alabama. The second one, which is very funny, is that after the Blind Boys say, you can't play with us, we already have a drummer, go talk to our friend the Hoff. Is that what they call him?
Yeah, the Hoff.
yeah.
Which,
go talk to our friend
on
the
that
Hoff.
note, very funny that they call that the Blind Boys of Alabama say our buddy the Hoff. Like,
Yeah.
In no world do I see these people being buddies.
And the Hoff, the one, the only David Hasselhoff, who appears in, I feel like, a lot of movies as, like, himself. His cameo in this movie and his just general presence in this movie, to me, is so indicative of that kind of stunt casting cameo. And it's not even a cameo. He has many scenes in this movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. My whole life, ever since I saw, like, the SpongeBob movie, I've been obsessed with, like, the prevalence of David Hasselhoff as himself cameos, because there's just so many of them. And, like, it's just, he's not that famous of a person. I mean, he's mostly well known for Baywatch, which is not really that popular of a show anymore. But my whole life, I've known who he is just from seeing him show up. And, I mean, Dodgeball is probably the most famous one. But if you look at the Wikipedia article, List of Works by David Hasselhoff, which is a very funny title to me to refer to them as works. But
Easiest job in the world.
Yeah, he shows up as himself in, like, so many movies. Like, I counted over, like, 20 that he appears as himself, and I just listed some of the more famous ones. And there's even a whole movie called, like, Killing the Hoff, where he plays himself. Just insane how much this guy played, like, one role and then just played himself for the rest of his career. And it just feels like such a weird go-to joke. A lot of stuff do, like, we don't got something to do, like, let's throw in the Hoff. Let's put the Hoff in there. That'll get a laugh.
And to go even further, he plays a talent show judge, which is why EB goes to see him so he can play drums for him. He plays a talent show judge on this, which is a reference to him being a regular judge in the first few seasons of America's Got Talent, which is also very funny and plays into a pretty funny scene where there's a lot of slimy bits of, like, another auditionee playing like harmonica with his nose, and like a monkey doing stupid tricks, which the harmonica nose gag, which is maybe 5 seconds long, got the biggest laugh for me in this movie. But yeah, the Hoff is a slime star, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a real cottage industry out there for Hoff cameos.
So we have another cameo in this movie earlier on when Hop is in the real world and he's looking for a place to stay, and he comes across a mansion known for its bunnies, but he doesn't understand the context, as I'm sure some kids who saw this movie probably didn't either. But there's a voice-only cameo by the late Hugh Hefner, who basically is not letting E.B. into his mansion because he's not the right kind of bunny.
I feel like in a lot of slime, you see so many like jokes for the parents, jokes for the adults, whatever you want to call them. This was really the only one in that. Is this little Playboy bunny joke, which isn't too explicit or anything. It gives a pretty funny little call out in there.
It got Cat in the Hat flashbacks from that. So.
I'll say that this movie has a little more of like what I call like Hollywood jokes, which is it all takes place in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of humor about the locations they go to, and Playboy Mansion being, especially at the time, a very iconic location. So there's something fun if you're an Angelino to like see some of the like references there that is kind of old fashioned. It kind of reminds me of movies from an earlier era where like going to Hollywood was a big thing. And nowadays, I feel like that's a little more subtle because going to Hollywood is less of a common thing to like make it as a star, which is what EB is doing.
Right. Was it intentional that he chose LA when he's going through that rabbit hole transport? Like, did he choose it, or did it just kind of choose him?
No, they say there's a line about going to like where a star can become a thing. So he does choose it.
Okay. Yeah, that was interesting for me too. And I am joining the podcast from North Hollywood right now. And I just went to Van Nuys, which is where the O'Hare family is supposed to have their house, and so I went to the Wendy's in Van Nuys this morning. got a breakfast baconator in case you guys need more sponsors. No, but yeah, and I was like, I wonder where they would have theoretically had this house, because it's a nice house.
Yeah, it's a very nice house.
Well, that actually brings up a good point, which is at times the stakes of the movie feel like they're shortchanged. And one example is that James Marsden's supposed to be like this slacker dude, but then conveniently he gets to house sit a mega mansion in Beverly Hills. So then it's like, okay, plot resolved. He has a place to stay that is like the nicest place you could possibly stay in anywhere. And other times too, I was waiting for, there's a trio of characters known as the Pink Berets, and they are the like ninja bunnies sent to like rescue EB. And I was waiting for them to like take over and do something, but they're kind of just always a few hops behind EB, you know. And so multiple times there were times where like I thought the stakes would be higher, you know. It ends up being like, we'll figure it out, and then it does get figured out.
Right. Yeah. And another example where I was surprised that there wasn't a bigger payoff or crisis would have been the mess in the Beverly Hills mansion. I thought we were for sure going to meet her boss and have him walk in on a mess or something, and by the time she comes in, EB's cleaned it up or whatever. You know, it was just very odd.
They really emphasize like, don't go in this room. Whatever you do, you can't go in this room. And then he goes in and like messes up the room and runs the bubbles over, and then nothing really comes of it. You just get a fun scene where he's like playing Hole on Rock Band, and weird needle drop in there. I really didn't expect to hear Hole in this movie, but I was glad to hear it. But you just get a weird little cleanup scene, and nothing really comes of that.
The only reason I was wondering if they played Hole is because rabbits live in holes.
Yeah.
So I was like, is that like a really roundabout joke? But
I think Hole just is on that Rock Band game, like actually.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That song is on the first Rock Band game.
Which is weird because he is actually playing Rock Band, but later when they're talking about the music game that like the video game company's doing, they don't call it Rock Band. They call it by like some generic name because they're talking about making a blues version. That's why.
Yeah, it's like blues bands.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the mess, that's a perfect example of like where there's a moment for it could have been so much bigger and in my opinion so much slimier, but then there's no friction. It like solves itself, and So there were times where I was like, oh, come on, like crank up the phenometer here.
Yeah, I feel like the only character that really goes, because I thought the Pink Berets were kind of going to be secondary antagonists, and they kind of were, that they were always around, but there was no real like confrontation type thing other than they were kind of used. There's kind of a new trope I'm starting to realize as we watch more like talking animal movies of like the character that's like cute or unassuming. We saw it in Goosebumps with the gummy bears. We see it with, I feel like, talking baby movies. That's kind of the central conceit, is that the baby has like a tough guy voice, like having Bruce Willis play a baby and stuff like that. And in this, the Pink Berets were a part of that, where like there was even the scene where James Marsden said something like, "Oh, I didn't expect you all to be so cute" or something. Then they kick him or whatever. But like, yeah, it's like I feel like there's always a lot of jokes where something seems cute and then it's tough or scary.
That's a good trope. I like that. I think the perfect example would be Puss in Boots.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The Pink Berets reminded me of they look a little bit like Lola from Space Jam to me.
Yeah, especially new Lola.
We came prepared to save the day, so don't be fooled by the cute berets. Know what you're thinking, that we're pinking. Oh so cuddly, oh so snuggly. But when we're scheming, we're the meanest. Then these bunnies get real ugly. We're ready to fight, ready to rumble. So keep it right, there won't be no trouble. A rescue mission is what we're on. Got what it takes, that's right, come on. The Pink Berets.
Another big example in this movie of that is the main antagonist, Carlos, who we haven't really gotten into yet, who I feel like is one of the slimier characters to show up in this. They had the scene where he was pulling something, he was working out, it was a training montage, and he asked how his butt looked, which was very slimy to me.
Yeah.
I think we see a lot of Slimehouse movies and a lot of just comedies of this era, just like funny foreign accents. They're usually European accents. In this case, it's Hank Azaria kind of recycling his Bumblebee man voice he used to do on The Simpsons. I think they've recasted that role now after controversy, but he's very much doing this sort of like over-the-top Latin accent that I feel like you used to hear done a lot, especially by white actors, that wouldn't really fly now. And I feel like that's something about this character that rang is very slimy to me, sort of this accent humor.
As the only female of the group today, I couldn't help but wonder, I don't think this was intentional, but there's a line towards the end of the movie where I can see that Jasper knows where I'm going with this. The father bunny says a line about, a chick can't handle the egg of destiny. And I just thought it was really funny if we're looking into this probably way more than we need to. But just some of the political undertones of having, a monarchy system where the heir doesn't want the title, the throne, and the person who does want it is seen as incapable in some intrinsic way just because of who they are. So that made me laugh and want to cry a little bit.
Yeah, very strange that it is a very like fascistic government in the Easter Island. If you leave, then they send people after you. It's
Well, I heard Oprah's setting up an interview with Carlos next week to talk about the inherent unfairness of Easter Island.
I'm sure he has a lot to say.
Yeah, he's gonna sign with Ben Shapiro's like film company with Gina. What's her name? Gina Carano. They fired Carlos.
Yeah, I like that you bring that up, Jenna. I wrote that down as like a and I kind of took it as maybe a little tongue in cheek, but at the same time, maybe it's just the era we're in now, 10 years later. But it did feel a little cringeworthy to include something like that. And then it kind of makes you rethink the entire premise of like, oh, all of these quote unquote chicks who are chickens are working for, the men, and the men get all the glory and the profit.
I thought of it in the lens of like, these chicks are being exploited a little bit. And like, Carlos is this like organizer who's doing a strike, and he's unsuccessful in the end.
The strike or the coup d'etat, whatever.
I feel like it's something you see kind of concerningly often in like family movies. A lot of villains tend to be like a character that's like supposed to be in the right, but you can see where he's coming from. Like these characters are being exploited, but then the villain is a guy who takes it too far or whatever. And I feel like you see that very often in superhero movies and kids movies, and just even though like of course I will not I won't condone the methods of Carlos, but it is. I feel like it is like just a weird message that they slide into a lot of kids' movies now. To just have like sympathetic villains who end up going too far. It's just kind of. It's always thought it was concerning in a little bit.
Right. I found myself wanting to know, like, oh, maybe he wouldn't have been that bad of a leader. But, they place that he's disingenuous early on and that he's kind of performing for the Easter Bunny and picking on the people that report to him to kind of save his own face. But really, then I guess the thing that he does, if we're talking about how Candy plays such a big role in the movie, and the thing that he does that's unforgivable is that once he has power, he replaces the candy with like crickets and
it just makes the candy gross.
Yeah, I feel like they had to do that to make him unredeemable, because otherwise he's just like a union organizer, and that's a sympathetic role. But they had to do something to throw him over the edge and toss him under the bus.
Yeah, I think they should remake Reds with Carlos and the Warren Beatty.
Yellows.
Yellows.
This movie came out in spring of 2011, so you know they were trying to cash in on one of the biggest pop culture moments of all time when they have a Avatar joke thrown in this movie.
Yeah, that was a very funny bit, and it's. I feel like that's happened in other movies too, where somebody's pitching a movie or pitching an idea, and somebody's like, "Isn't that just Avatar, or isn't that just Transformers?"
Well, for the Avatar reference, this is the one moment where my 15 seconds of tangential fame from working at Illumination might come in handy. Ooh. I wondered if it was an inside joke, because when I worked for them after graduating, I worked on the theme park ride that was, Minion Mayhem from Despicable Me that's now at Universal Studios. That was the project that I worked on, and my boss was a co-producer of Avatar. And I'm sure that they were in talks with her by the point that they were writing the script. And so I just wonder if that was their way of just kind of winking at someone that they were working alongside for other projects, even though she didn't really do anything for Hop directly that I'm aware of. So.
It seems like it very well might be the case. So that's a good ride too. Fun ride.
Yeah, it was good fun, and we got to go to the premiere. We got to go to the premiere in Orlando.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story for another time. It was really, really fun.
Maybe we'll do a Despicable Me or Minions episode sometime. I'm sure we'll get there.
I'd be happy to come back.
They're like, that's such a debate. That'll be a hot debate, because I don't consider the Minions Slimehouse, but I think that they're definitely born of Slimehouse. So,
Banana.
Yeah.
You knew it was coming.
But yeah, I think it's funny because Avatar, the joke with Avatar now is that it has no pop culture thumbprint compared to, say, Titanic or Star Wars or the former highest grossing movies. And it's now become like a self-awareness on Twitter where like the joke is about the joke that it has no pop culture reference. But so it's funny to see a movie sincerely joke about Avatar and like the blue people and all that in a way that only the movies that came out right after Avatar had those type of Avatar jokes.
Yeah, always makes me think of that, like the Oscars that year when they had Ben Stiller come out as a Na'vi. For some reason, like I think of that more with Avatar than like even the movie itself. I always think of Ben Stiller at the Oscars as a Na'vi.
I mean, it just became the highest grossing movie of all time again.
Yeah, no, it's back on top.
It is? Why?
Yeah, they re-released it in China.
Oh, that's lame. They just did that together.
Yeah, because they were so close, and I'm sure people are like really desperate going out to the movies now. So,
I mean, Endgame had a re-release to beat it anyway, so it's like
it's probably going to be an endless. It's probably going to be an endless cycle, like Endgame. Yeah. Re-release takes on top. Avatar re-release takes it to the top.
You and me are destined to go round and
then
round
eventually
forever.
we'll get Avatar 2. We'll get The Way of Water. Maybe that'll be the top.
In 2100, we'll get that one.
The seed bearer. I think that's supposed to be the second one.
James Cameron invents immortality so that he can keep working on Avatar.
On Avatar 2, still just working on 2.
I think that the other joke about pitching Avatar and essentially trying to rip off Avatar is that the one thing that I remember about Avatar is that it's basically the plot of Pocahontas. So it's itself kind of a ripoff of something with
and Dances with Wolves. It's like it's like beat for beat those two movies, and it's just in space. But
the climactic battle at the candy factory, James Marsden is tied up using licorice, and like he has to eat his way through it. And then I think the Hugh Laurie, the bunny dad, he's like, you don't actually eat that stuff, do you, or something like that. It's a joke about how terrible licorice is, and it spoke to my soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the gummy cannons. Can't forget the gummy cannons.
Yeah, candy as weapons or food as weapons is very important to Slimehouse. We see that in droves here. The ninjas are frozen in chocolate, and that's it. Then they're done. I swear, they don't do anything in this movie.
Which, it's funny, some of the scenes in the candy factory actually brought me back in a very roundabout way to We Can Be Heroes, which we looked at earlier this season, and just how kind of colorful and out of otherworldly this set piece looked. And in that way, it got me thinking a little bit about this movie almost feels very young. It doesn't have that snark, like adolescent or prepubescent snarkiness that I think a lot of the biggest Slimehouse has, especially when it comes down to just the concept of like the Easter Bunny and anything that has to do in that world feels so much more younger to me, like very young. Whereas when you go to Los Angeles and you go to the actual world, that's a little older. It kind of had a kind of off balance between those two tones for me in terms of how young it was going versus it kind of wanted to be a little bit more of that snarky adolescent Slimehouse that we reference a lot and when it goes to Los Angeles. And with that, let's jump into some slime scores. Jenna, do you want to kick us off?
Not at all.
I was gonna say it's kind of putting someone on the spot if they. I think hearing some slime scores first might.
Yeah, they should hear some arguments.
I want some context. I want to know what you guys, how you guys weigh in, because I kind of have a window, but yeah.
Alrighty then I'll just jump right in with my score. I have this at an 8. Kind of contrary to what I just said. I actually do think it's very of the Slimehouse mindset. It's all about that wish fulfillment. It's all about kind of like how cool would it be if I was the actual Easter Bunny or the Easter Bunny was real. For this era, it's about as slimy as it gets. For that, I put it at a comfortable 8.
Yeah, I echo that pretty much exactly. I also had this at an 8. Maybe if you were comparing this with super classic Prime Slime like Max Keeble or something in that vein, it wouldn't be quite as high, but I think this is like the platonic ideal after watching a lot of Neo Slime, especially for our year-end roundup last year. This feels very much like the most Neo Slime movie, kind of the prototype for that I can think of. I think like the character, having a CGI character in the lead, I think a lot of the food, humor, and candy, very slimy, and a big shout out to James Marsden. I think he's one of the slime, a true Neo Slime star, and he gives a really slimy performance in this, so yeah, I gotta echo that. It's pretty high up there for me, up to 8.
It's funny, on the subject of Marsden, there's a scene where he decides he's going to be the Easter Bunny, and it shows him in like a room full of real eggs, and he's painting it. And to me, I wrote down cartoon come to life, because it does feel like a cartoon come to life, which is something that we identified early on as part of Slimehouse. I am struggling though, because I realized for the last couple weeks I've been resting on the fact that I have this like nostalgia bend to Slimehouse that totally inflates the score. I think with Max Keeble last week, a huge part of my 10 rating was not only the content of the movie, but also where it positioned in my own life and all that. And that's, everyone's a little biased, but I think that especially of those early thousands era movies, it's easier to be like, oh yeah, it's a perfect Slimehouse movie, or it's totally Slimehouse. And so my gut would be a little lower, but I also agree that it has, for a Neo Slime audience, and I think it's there, but I think I'm going to go with a 6, which isn't to say it's not like, it doesn't have Slimehouse going in it. I think it can be a little softer. It's not as like gross or messy as I think it could be to get some Slimehouse ratings up higher, and it's a little more polished of a piece, hence some of the animation part. And so for me, it's a solid 6, which is still kind of on the top end, but lower on the top end.
I think Nelson said a lot of what I was going to say. I'm going to side with him on this one. I do think it's more interesting to view this as like, is this the beginning of Proto Slime? But even then, down the road, like the Sonic the Hedgehog movie that came out, also with James Marsden, I feel like that really outslimes this in terms of like the characterization of the main animated protagonist. What Jasper said about like it doesn't have the prepubescent snark that I think the slimiest films do. Even in its slimiest moments, I definitely felt like it could have gone more slimy than it did. I think it was, I mean, I feel like the restraint in that is kind of like a creative choice for sure. So I would go with a 6 as well.
I sense the conflict in you. You were really deliberating. I was teetering between a 6 and a 7, mostly because, you know, a lot of the terminology of Neo and Proto, Slime, those things, if I had a better understanding, I might be more enthusiastic about, yeah, it's slime. But there were certain elements where I thought, it's almost slime. There is mess, which is something we see a lot of, but like the biggest mess is literally bubbles like soap. So it's like the cleanest mess you can possibly have.
That's true.
And I think that there was that single parent. It's like unexplained why the Easter Bunny doesn't have an Easter Bunness. I don't know what the female version of that is. And so there were all these things where I was like, it's hitting the mark, kind of. But I don't know that I look at this and go, yeah, I see Slimehouse in it. So I would probably just set myself squarely at a 7 because I did feel like if what we're saying about Slimehouse is that there's a lot of nostalgic elements to it, I certainly within the first 5 minutes was like, yeah, I don't really like Easter candy. And I was relating to it personally. It feels very set in its time with the Avatar reference, the music. So yeah, I'd say 7.
You know, it's 2011 when the soundtrack has Dynamite by Tayo Cruz in it.
Yeah,
That
just
is correct.
real like middle school, freshman year, like school dance vibes to a lot of this soundtrack.
Cool, and with that wraps up Hop. We'll be hopping along to another animal-friendly movie next week. Thanks so much, Jenna, for joining us and providing a little illumination.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks
It was
so much.
fun.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Oh, the other thing I'll say is that like there's the sibling rivalry, right? I was gonna go down that element too of like, oh, which of us is the slacker in the family dynamic? And I thought it was funny that like Kaylee gives him an interview and Jared invited me to be interviewed. Felt like we came full circle there.
Who's the adopted one between the two?
Bella the pug.
Yes, that's the correct answer.
Yes.
We'll see you guys next week and stay slimy, y'all.